I would like you to talk about your concept of ownership.
Okay.
And about funding.
So the ownership piece for me is something that we haven't really cultivated. We've thought in terms of membership, and we promote a kind of belonging relationship to our ministry, but we haven't necessarily institutionalized the value of ownership and what I would also describe as partnership. So when I talk about ownership, it's always in the context of partnering. So in principle, we have members, but our members aren't in ownership necessarily. And so we have to define what ownership means in order to really kind of have a context for it. But let's not define it right away. Let's simply first be in the awareness that we're shifting from trying to cultivate our funding model out of trying to see right now our tithing-based funding model is built around ostensibly how people feel about things. So in other words, the bottom line is not that they're in a class and saying yes to the structure of a class. The bottom line is that after all is said and done, they're still left with tithing in the context of how they feel about things. And so that means they're always looking outside of themselves, and we're training people through our current tithing practice to look outside of themselves for evidence that they've been fed. And so we're wanting, while that has worked, I'm not saying that it hasn't worked or hasn't been effective, it no longer works for a number of different reasons. Primarily because the traditionals and baby boomers, who are the primary practitioners of the tithing-based funding model, those folks are exiting our system, and in record numbers. And so we're just having, just in the phenomenon of these times, people exiting that practice. Plus, the phenomenon of the millennials mean that they're not acclimated to the prosperity teaching or the tithing principles. And if they research tithing, they will find that there's no biblical to support a tithing of one's income to a spiritual organization. So we have kind of co-opted a tradition because of our minister-centric ministry practice, 400 years old, just adopting what has been the tradition and the staple of our congregational ministry practice, which is tithing. So if we're to create an alternative that doesn't throw away the baby out with the bathwater, but still maintains those who find value in the practice, but there's still a need to retool it. We need to retool the tithing practice as tithing as source, as opposed to tithing to source, because that keeps the outer focus. And we want to shift things so people have a sense of their own empowerment. To tithe as source gives them a sense to see that they can make a difference.
One of the things about tithing as source, I think, that is very important is how it's done. It's done from a sense of radical generosity. And so that is an element of teaching this that is very important, is that people need to get into that state as they are tithing, because that begins to open up to the whole sense of tithing as source. So that's one aspect of it. It's not just a head thing here. We want to get the whole body in it, but it's also shifting from tithing, just tithing 10% to being source unto whatever it is you want to bless, and how you want to see spirit show up, in a sense, kind of more of that. And so recently we had something at our church that I wanted to share with the congregation. And that is that we had someone bequeath some money. And so we had $3,500 we were tithing. And so we sat together as a board to really look at how could this money best bless someone or something in a way that it could really have a benefit and that we could tithe as source. So we considered several options, and we came up with, in our local area in Spokane, the Catholic Charities have just built housing for the homeless, and they're starting to bring people into it. And so I called them up and said, we have this money and we're looking for the best way, and tell me how you could use this money. And they were very excited, and they said, well, we have a grant for building these places, but what we need money for are the programs once they're built to bring people in and to keep them off the streets and that sort of thing. So we gave them that, and that was several months ago. And then we just recently got a letter from them joyously telling us how they spent our $3,500 and telling us that we had helped keep 36 families off the streets. We kept them in housing, and that was something like 45 adults and 30 some odd children. It was a total of 77 people who were being housed because of our tithe. And so I announced that to the whole congregation, that we are a tithing church, and that when you tithe to this church, you are participating in a greater aspect of this, where we are blessing the world with our tithe, and that we're tithing as source. And it was so powerful, so impactful, that people got it, that this is not just about mindlessly taking your money and giving it to the church to keep the lights on. And, you know, it had some substance to it and life to it, and it inspired people. It opened their hearts. So that is a big part of tithing as source. We really want to get the power of it, teaching people what that's about. Okay, that's all.
All right, thanks, Jane. So I'm not saying that we're stopping tithing. I'm just saying that we have to increase the scope of how we engage people, because the demographics of who is now coming to churches, that landscape is shifting. So as we have more millennials and less receptivity to tithing as a funding component of our long-term sustainability, we have to look towards other means. Let's say, for a moment, we don't talk about tithing. That's not a part of it. What else can we do? So absent of creating a funding structure based upon whether or not people feel good about things, feel fed, feel cared for, feel served, which is the setup that we've created. We've created a dependency between the community and ostensibly us as spiritual leaders, as opposed to an empowerment community where we're not here to serve, to take care of, to make you feel good. It doesn't mean that doesn't happen, but our intent is not that. Our intent, however, is to empower you, to give you what you need to take ownership of your life. So the whole conversation around ownership begins to empower each individual in their own personal life. And then we have to translate that message to how it impacts the ministry, to the ways in which we want that principle of ownership to translate into how the ministry gets supported. So that's the first part, is planting the seeds of that value. In addition to the value of ownership, the board, the leaders have to then show up differently in relationship to the owners. So right now, your relationship to the members is one in which you protect them. You keep them from worrying about stuff. You insulate them from the drama, from the stress. That's your unintended role in the minister-centric model. You can't do it any other way, because you're not in partnership. You're in protectorship.
So who's you?
I'm talking about you as leaders. I'm talking about you as congregational ministry leaders. You're not in a partnership role with the community of governing members as owners. That's not, I'm talking about what we have to create. We have to create that phenomenon, that community dynamic where our owners, those who are in ownership of our church, we are in partnership, we being the leaders, are in partnership with the owners. In conclusion, that we want to consider moving towards an ownership, partnership-based funding model, because it helps us appeal to people's maturity. In other words, it takes more maturity to create this new funding model. We have to shift out of our caretaking, codependent, family system-oriented ministry embedded practice. That has to change, and that's not an easy thing. That's why it takes time.